Hello and welcome into the Wednesday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. I'm filling in for Ross Levitan. Today we've got David Morassutti, typically of the Locked On Leafs podcast, my partner in crime over on the Locked On Leafs. But today on the Eastern Conference edition, he'll be joining us, and we're going to go through at the midway-ish mark, the post-Christmas mark. Where are the teams in the Atlantic? We'll take a look there. The Metro. And then there's some interesting discourse online. John Scott, former NHLer, formerly of the Buffalo Sabres, was famously a Buffalo Sabre. Um, was he with the Sabres when he ended up? Yes, he was. Famously a Buffalo Sabre All-Star. Regardless, he had some interesting comments on Connor McDavid. We're going to get into that a little bit and talk about maybe the top 5 players in the East that we would build around to win a championship. So that and more coming up on today's edition of the Locked On NHL podcast.
Your Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We're both hosts at Locked On Leafs, but today, Morassutti, this is no longer the Battle of Ontario. This is Locked On Leafs takeover edition of the Locked On NHL with Ross Levitan on Christmas vacation. But we're still bringing you an Eastern Conference edition of the show this week. And so we're going to break down what we've seen so far out of the teams in the Atlantic and the Metro. And then the top 5 players in the East that we would build around to win a championship, that'll also be coming up a little bit later on today. But why don't we start with the division that we're most familiar with, Dave, the Atlantic Division. And, when you look at the Atlantic at this point, when we embarked on the season, I don't think anybody expected Boston to be up at the top of the standings. You consider all the injuries that they had accrued going into the year. And all of a sudden, it didn't matter who was playing, what goaltender was in net, who was injured, who was coming back, who was coaching this team. Obviously, with a brand new coach in Jim Montgomery, the Boston Bruins just don't lose. They are 57 points on the year, 27 4-3, not only sitting atop of the President's Trophy standings, but also firmly on top in this Atlantic Division. Could you say that, the Boston Bruins, maybe the best story through the first part of the season, the first bit up until the Christmas holiday?
Well, it was the New Jersey Devils, and then they've kind of fallen off a little bit. See, I would say the Boston Bruins are deserving of, the praise that they've we thought that Boston was going to be going on a different trajectory, and they've just gone the opposite way. And not just like gone the opposite way, they're like shot up the opposite way. But I don't think many expected this, especially, the offseason was considered a messy one for them for many reasons. And then, the team best players weren't even there to start the season, right? Brad Marchand, he was injured to start the year. Charlie McAvoy, injured to start the year, and yet they still remain pretty in a pretty comfortable position in the Atlantic Division. Toronto's catching up a little bit, but no, they're easily probably the best story right now in the league.
Yeah, I don't think anyone, like I said, no one anticipated them being at the top, to end off the 2022 calendar season. But here we are, and they're doing it like as a group. I mean, yeah, you've got David Pastrnak who's putting up a MVP like season, 24 goals. He's got 47 points in 34 games, but he's the only player operating at a point per game basis. That's a lie, actually. Marchand has 27 and 26, so he missed a stretch of games, but he is a point per game. But outside of that, I mean, you just have a bunch of depth players stepping up. I mean, you've got Jake DeBrusk, who has found new life under Jim Montgomery. He's got 14 goals, 27 points in 33 games. Taylor Hall's got the same 13 goals in 34 games. You're getting production out of David Krejci, who's got 26 points in 29 games. Pavel Zacha, 21 points. Charlie Coyle's up to 18. Nick Foligno, has 16 points through 34 games to start the season. So you're getting some contributions from a lot of different guys, and I think that's a big reason for why this team has found success. And then we haven't even mentioned the goaltenders who have been unbelievable. Linus Ullmark right now, probably the front runner for goaltender of the year. I would say he's got to be up there. I mean, he's 19-1-1 with a 936 save percentage and a 194 goals against to go along with a pair of shutouts on the year. He's been unfreaking believable, and it's just top to bottom. Seems like this team is performing, and they've still yet to lose a game at home in regulation. 18-0-2 without a regulation loss at home to start the season. It's amazing what they've been able to do. Keep going with this theme here of the Atlantic Division. We've got the team that you and I cover on Locked On Leafs on a daily basis, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they hit the 50-point mark last night with a win over the St. Louis Blues. Bit of a bumpy start, but boy, did this team catch fire, and they've been playing some excellent, excellent hockey of late.
Yeah, and we've been talking about trying to keep pace with the Boston Bruins. I have actually something I wanted to share with you. This has been the last 15 games, 20 games for both the Leafs and the Bruins. For those of you watching on YouTube here, you could not have asked for any more identical teams.
Yes.
This is pretty astonishing what we're seeing from the Leafs and Bruins over since pretty much since November.
So for those listening, this is the last 20 games.
Last 20 games.
So last 20 games for both the Maple Leafs and the Bruins, okay? They both have 15 wins. They both have 2 losses. They both have 3 overtime losses for 33 points and an 825 win percentage. Literally an identical record over the course of the last 20 games. They legitimately have scored the exact same amount of goals, and that is 74 goals apiece through 20 games, averaging over 3 goals a game, nearly 4 goals a game. And then we look at the goals against. The Bruins have stopped 2 more goals. That's it. Just 2 more goals that they've stopped as opposed to the Maple Leafs, who have allowed 44 to Boston's 42 goals against. So almost identical statistics over the course of the last 20 games for both of these teams. What is incredible. You would think you win 15 out of 20 games, you should be able to make up ground in a divisional race. Unfortunately, you got the team that you're trying to catch playing just as good, legitimately just as good of hockey. It's got to be a little frustrating for the Maple Leafs to not be able to make up a lot of ground there. But we'll see what ends up happening. But certainly the way that they're playing, the buy-in that this team has. I mean, you go check us out at Locked On Leafs. We talk about it every single day, covering that team. But I think on a national level, I think it's worth understanding how well this team is playing defensively, and not just the defensemen as a group, but also the forwards, which is helping this team's goaltending, and they're as a group turning defense into offense, which has made them one of the most dangerous teams in hockey over the course of the last 2 months or so. The rest of this division, though, I think there's a little bit of a separation now. You got Boston, Toronto, and they've got Tampa, who I guess is right there with Toronto, but there's 9 points difference between the Leafs and the Bolts in the standings. Tampa does have 3 games in hand where they can make up, a lot of those points. But the Tampa Bay Lightning is another one of those teams that got off to a slower start than you anticipate, but they've won 7 of the last 3 games, and now they're kind of really starting to get it going right now.
No, they really are. You kind of remind yourself of why Tampa's always in the position that they are in, come playoff time. They just know when's the right. As soon as they kind of work out the kinks, they get right back to being, the Tampa that many people have come to know. It's also a reason why many teams just want to avoid Tampa in general in the playoffs. So slow start for them, but they're really starting to hit their stride again.
And then comes a big drop off for the remaining 5 teams in this division. You've got Detroit, who's 4th place with 35 points. You've got Buffalo and Florida, both tied with 34 points. And then you've got Ottawa with 33, tied with Montreal, also with 33 points. So you've got 2 points which is the difference between being in fourth in this Atlantic and being in eighth place in this Atlantic. If we were to fast forward a week from now till next Wednesday, I mean, the Montreal Canadiens could be in fourth in this division, and Detroit could be in last, in eighth, realistically, based on how their schedule goes. If the rest of these teams start winning games, but I think we can both say that the biggest disappointment, I suppose, maybe even league wide right now, is in the Atlantic Division. And I'm looking squarely at the Florida Panthers, who are 15, 16, and 4, a sub 500 team, currently sixth in the division, a -6 in goal differential. They've lost three in a row. They've lost 7 of their last 10. They just can't seem to really get going here, coming off a season where they had won the President's Trophy, and then they said hasta la bye bye to their head coach, Andrew Burnett, and said, we're going to bring in a veteran in Paul Maurice. And it has not gone well at all. Florida on the verge of going for President's Trophy winners to, on the outside looking in, maybe not making the playoffs.
Yeah, and the worst part is they don't own their first round pick.
No, they don't. That's
They don't own
right.
their first round pick for the next 3 seasons.
Oh, God. This team is in so much trouble. And look, my bold prediction at the beginning of the year, I believe on this show, I said it probably on every show because this was my bold prediction, was that Florida was going to miss the playoffs. I didn't think they were going to be this far out of it this early, though. Like, when I say miss the playoffs, I thought, on the outside looking in, they were just going to miss. They're sitting here right now with 34 points. The last team to make the playoffs right now is at 43 points. So they're sitting here at the start or post Christmas, and they're already 9 points out of a playoff spot by Christmas. That's not what I anticipated from this group.
No, I thought they were. I thought there was a good chance they would miss the playoffs, but I thought they were going to be contending for a wild card spot. But that's what happens when you pretty much go all in on one season. Where you know what, it was a really good regular season for the Panthers, but they're also doing it not in the way that's conducive to being successful in the playoffs. And now they're paying for it, and they're going to pay for it for the next 3 years.
Do you think that there would be any thoughts on firing Paul Maurice if this team doesn't get it going quickly? I mean, I know he was brought in on a long-term deal and he came, they just brought him in. I mean, would they cut bait that quickly given how badly they've started out the season and, it's just not going well for them?
I don't think they will, just because Florida ain't flush with cash to just be paying out coaches left for, I think they're still paying out Joe Quenneville. They're still paying, and that was a pretty.
That's a weird situation. I'm curious.
I'm pretty sure.
Was he suspended though? No, he was relieved of his duties, right?
Yeah, I think he was relieved of his duty. So I don't think it's not like
But then the league suspended him. Like, in order for him to come back and coach, he has to be okayed by the league. So it's a very confusing thing. But I wonder if they could bring him back to Florida. Like,
I think that ship has kind of sailed. I think he resigned.
Yeah, like he stepped down amicably
So he resigned. So I don't know if that potentially.
I don't know if he's getting paid by them. I don't know if he's on the books.
But Paul, you brought I just don't think Florida's in the business of paying what they're paying for the all. And let's not forget they have like the Keith Yandel buyout on the books as well. That's a hefty contract there. I just like Florida's not one of those teams I feel like can afford to just be throwing out coaches and like who are you getting? Only coach you can realistically say could come in and maybe help this team is Barry Trotz. And I don't even know if Barry wants to coach this year.
He ain't going there. No, sirree. He is definitely not going there. All right, let's move on to the rest of the teams here in the Atlantic. I guess of the teams remaining, Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, and Montreal. I mean, which one of those 4 teams, I guess, has given you a little bit of hope that they could maybe be somewhat competitive here in the back half of the season?
Maybe Buffalo. Be like Tage Thompson is a star this season. Like he's been that good.
He's got 50 points. He's third in the NHL in scoring with 50 points.
I think if Buffalo can find a way to get a better goaltender and upgrade that blue line a little bit, that's a team that I think could do something. Dahlin is shaping up to be that first overall selection worthy. Jeff Skinner even looks respectable considering that was a contract that nobody thought would work out there.
He had a
I
good
think
season last year. His underlying numbers last season were actually really good, so
yeah,
I'm glad that he's found his footing. It seemed like, I don't know, there was a weird situation going on, like, this season that Eichel when he got hurt and Jeff Skinner, it seemed to have affected him, it impacted him. When Taylor Hall was there, it didn't go over very well, but it seems like now he's kinda back to being a top 6 point producer, playing alongside with Tuck and with Tage Thompson, and things are going really well for him. I'm happy for Jeff Skinner in that regard.
yeah, like Buffalo they don't have they have some space here when it comes to like cap space. They got assets, they have 3 first round picks in this upcoming draft.
They have
If I'm
Philly's pick, by the way.
them, is that
They have Philly's pick.
they do have Philly's second round pick, and they have Vegas' second round pick, which that's gonna be a late second rounder. But Phillies would be an early or pretty much almost close to a first round pick. If you can get another goaltender to pair with Craig Anderson, like Craig Anderson should not be the number one. He is a good 1B right now based on the workload he's doing. If you can get that other goaltender to be with, to take the load off of Craig Anderson and maybe find a bit of an upgrade on the blue line, which I think Buffalo has the assets to do, they could be a team that could push for Walker. Like at some point, the Sabres team has to think about contending and not thinking about next year. They
Yeah.
like I know they're still a relatively young team, but they also got guys that are, they're hitting their prime right now. They gotta take advantage of that.
Yeah, completely agree. We'll see if there's a goaltender out there and available though that they can bring in. Like, there's just not many goalies, I guess, that are going to be on the block. I mean, even if you look at the teams that are bottom of the barrel, how many of them are looking to move on from their goalies? And of those who are willing to move on from them, how many of them are really going to help Buffalo and be a legitimate upgrade? I don't know. We'll see. That's kind of a weird situation. They may have to wait for the summer to try and do something in that regard. But I'm with you where goaltending is really their weak spot right now. You got that young kid Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen who's starting to come on and play well, and maybe he could be the answer, perhaps. But either way, I do expect for this team, if they want to do anything this year, they clearly have the goal scoring. They lead the entire league in goals scored, but they also allow a lot of goals themselves. 109 goals against with 127 goals scored. Actually, Boston surpassed them with 132 goals. They've played a couple more games since Buffalo was the leader in the clubhouse at one point here. But either way, I'm with you. I'm with you. All right, let's take a quick break. When we get back, we'll get into the Metro Division. We'll break things down there and then talk about some of the guys in the East that we build a playoff contender with. Some interesting comments were made by former NHLer John Scott about Connor McDavid. We'll share those, and we'll do that in just a few moments. But first, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors, and that's BetOnline. BetOnline.net, it's your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball, hockey. You got the World Juniors, all of that. Well, they got it all at betonline.net. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Welcome back into the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti, who's filling in for my typical co-host in Ross Levitan. He's joining me. Typically, we do Locked On Leafs together, so you can go and follow us there as well. Subscribe up on YouTube. Also, subscribe to the Locked On NHL show, wherever you get your podcast. New daily content coming out 5 days a week. You can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcast from. So we went through the Atlantic Division. Now it's time to go through the Metropolitan Division, which to me, even more of a buzzsaw in terms of the depth of the division. And in the Atlantic, it's okay. You've got those three teams: Boston, Toronto, Tampa. It's been that way for the last 4 or 5 years. Last year, Pittsburgh or Florida got into the mix, but the last few seasons, it's really been those three teams that are battling it out. It's not really that way on the other side of the conference here. You've got like 5 or 6 teams who are battling it out after Carolina. I think Carolina right now stands at the top of that division. They do in terms of standings. They got 52 points, second in the NHL with 52 points. And then after that, they've got Jersey with 46 points through 34 games, Washington, and then Pittsburgh and the Rangers coming in after them. So, I think that Carolina certainly, let's talk about them quick. That's the number one team in the Metro Division by far.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Like it's always seems like it's always them, and then they just have to just finally get over that hump, right? They're the one team you always consistently think are going to be the top in that division. Like there's not many flaws you can point out in their games, right? Coaching's there, goaltending seems to be there, and something that seems to be reliable. Their defense, they don't exactly have stars quality defensemen like you always think about, but they're all pretty good. And forwards, like they just have the total package over there. Like it's hard to really point out many flaws. And it's funny because, you know, they kind of stick with it, right? And they find ways to add players. And like Max Pacioretty, still waiting to see what that fit is going to be like with them. I'm very curious to see how that all comes about. But yeah, Carolina, they're just the constant in that division.
They've been like a darling dark horse team for me for the last few seasons. Like I love what they've built. They've always had an extremely deep back end. They've really been building that forward core for the last little while, led by Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov. You've got Seth Jarvis. Martin Necas is having a big breakout season this year. So you're getting a lot of players out there, or a lot of guys on that team that are really stepping up. And obviously, Rob Brindamore, one of the best goaltenders or one of the best coaches in the NHL. And goaltending, which you brought up, has kind of been their Achilles heel for a number of years. And this year doesn't seem to be. They've got this young kid. I mean, the injuries to Antti Ranta, injuries to Freddie Anderson. Oh, they're down to their third string goalie, Peter Kochetkov, who is a young Russian goaltender who they drafted a few years back. And I mean, this kid's just been unbelievable for them. And he's rocketed. I'm checking it out right now on betonline.net. He went from at one point, Dave, he was 100-1 odds to win the Calder Trophy. He's now down to just 3-1 odds. So from 100-1 to 3-1 based on what he's been able to do this season. And he's been incredible. He's up at the top of the league in a lot of goaltending categories when it comes to save percentage, goals against, shutouts. He's got 3 shutouts on the year, which is tied, with Connor Hellebuyck, Sorokin, Kemper, Huso, like all these guys who are up there. Save percentage, second to only Linus Ullmark with a 928 save percentage, and second to only Linus Ullmark, actually tied for first, with a 194 goals against average. He's been unbelievable, man. Like for me, I think even at 3-1, I think he might be able to make a good argument that he could be the Calder Trophy winner over a guy like Matty Beniers if he can continue to play this way and earn that starting goaltending job in Carolina and take them to a division record, especially if Beniers and company fall off the way that I believe Seattle will. So they've got it all, man. They got the forwards, they got the blue line, and now they've got this young goaltender who's also getting going. And let's not forget about Rod Brindamore, who's just an absolutely fantastic coach himself. The rest of this division is really just, man, it's tough. It's tight. From Jersey, from 2 to 6, from second to sixth in the division, 4 points separates these guys. So you got the Devils at 46 points, got the Capitals with 44 points, Pittsburgh with 43 points, the Rangers with 43, and then the Islanders have 42 points through 36 games. I mean, of those guys, of those teams that I just mentioned, Jersey, Washington, Pittsburgh, New York, and both New York teams, which one do you believe is most for real, that you feel most comfortable saying they're 100% going to be a playoff team? And then which one of these teams maybe are a pretender and will end up on the outside looking in Because I believe that there's going to be 5 teams from this Metro making the playoffs. I think that both wild card spots are going to be claimed by 2 of these 5 teams that we just mentioned. So which one of those do you think it's going to be? And then which team do you think is probably going to fall to the wayside over the next few months here?
That's a really tough one. I've been a big Rangers supporter in terms of what I think they can do. They were off to a brutal start. Like Shesterkin was just not like after what he did last year and what he's doing this year. Like the Rangers need him to be at an elite level if they want to contend this season. So I feel like if he can turn his game around, that's the team I feel like that can make the biggest jump. And then the team that I'm not big on Washington. And the reason is I think at some point that goaltending is not going to hold up. I don't think Charlie Lindgren is going to be the long term,
Darcy Kemper.
but he hasn't he's been injured and he hasn't been able to really it wasn't a good start for the Capitals this year. I just think the Capitals they're getting a little bit healthier. I just don't know if I trust Kemper to stay healthy, and I don't know if I can trust Charlie Lindgren. Like he's been on such a tear, and that's really I think the reason why they've gone up in the standings the way that they have. I just don't know if it's sustainable. The one thing I will say though is they do have Ovechkin. They're on like the Ovechkin high right now of trying to, continue this great story that he's been on. But I just don't know if I'm a big believer in Washington right now. Right now, they're proving me wrong. They're on a great streak. I just don't know if that's going to be sustainable for them.
Yeah, they're on a 5-game winning streak right now. They've won 9 of the last 10 games. They're arguably the hottest team next to Carolina in the NHL. They've been playing excellent, and it's funny. It was no more than a month ago, I think, on this very podcast that the traditional co-host of the show, Ross Levitan, said that Ovechkin's been one of the more disappointing players that was around. That they've I think it was that maybe we did this at the beginning of December, one of the more big disappointments on the year, and he said Alex Ovechkin was one. And I'm like, man, I can't agree with that. I disagree. I think that he's had a lot of chances, and I dove into the numbers, and he did have a lot of looks and a lot of good opportunities, but just wasn't bearing. It wasn't scoring. Went on to get 2 goals that night, and has since been on a scoring tear, and now officially sits second all time, passing Gordie Howe for goals in his National Hockey League career, which is obviously outstanding to be able to watch in real time this history that he's able to make seemingly on a nightly basis. But I kind of do believe in Washington. Like I think that is a team for sure that I believe is a playoff team. They've dealt with a lot of injuries themselves, and they've been able to overcome a lot of it, trying to just do different things. I think they're going to hopefully they get back at some point. Tom Wilson will be coming back in the next little bit. And that should certainly help them. And then Darcy Kemper, if he gets healthy, I believe that gives them the goaltending that they really haven't had for a lot of this season. But I kind of believe in Washington. I believe in New Jersey. I think what they're doing is pretty sustainable, and that's a club and a team that I think can do some good things. They're in the same boat where it's like goaltending is kind of there. They're a better team than Buffalo, but I look at them similarly where it's like if one thing's going to hold them back, it's going to be goaltending. But I think that they're a team that can outscore a lot of their problems, much like we saw at the Toronto Maple Leafs a season ago. And Pittsburgh's a good team. I think Pittsburgh, and they're another team. They've won 7 of the last 10. You've got Sidney Crosby. To me, it's the Islanders. Like the Islanders are that club that I think on the outside looking in. And if you look at the last 10 games, they've only won 4 of the last 10, so they're 4-4-2 in their last 10 games. They've won a couple here in a row, but ultimately, I still don't see the Islanders as a very good team. They're very leaky defensively, which is not what you expect out of them. They relied early on a lot of Ilya Sorokin bailing them out, and without him playing at an MVP level performance, they just don't really have the team capable enough, I believe, to be better than those clubs that are ahead of them, and the Rangers, Pittsburgh, Washington, and New Jersey. So I think the Islanders might be that team on the outside, looking at when all said and done in this division.
They were my second pick. Like the Islanders, they play a certain way. If it works, it works. When it doesn't, it's just brutal to watch. But like Yeah, I like their goaltending. Like if there's a team that, let's say the Islanders start to fall off a little bit, could Varlamov be a goaltender that some of these goalie needy teams call about? But
Yeah,
right now, winning, and I don't know if Lou is gonna want to do that. But I mean, with Lou, you never know what he's gonna do.
I've thought about that. I've thought about that potentially, like a Buffalo, maybe Varlamov. But I think he has a no trade, and if he wants to leave New York, I'm not 100%. And just really quickly, the Capitals over the course of the last month, so since December 1st, have the fifth best expected goal differential in the National Hockey League, right after the Boston Bruins, and just ahead of the Devils, the Stars, and the Wild, who have played some pretty solid hockey of late. So, Washington, yeah, they're getting some good goaltending, obviously from Charlie Lindgren right now, but they're also playing well in front of him, which is helping him be as successful as he's been. I think once that team gets healthier, I think they could see a nice second half surge out of the Washington Capitals. All right, on the other side, quickly, we'll have to note this John Scott situation that's going on, running rampant online, and then we can go through some of the guys who we think would be worthy startup players if we were to start a championship contending franchise in the Eastern Conference. So we'll do that on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti filling in for Ross Levitan. You listen to the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back into the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. The Locked On NHL podcast has new shows with new hosts each and every day, Monday through Friday. Today is your Wednesday Eastern Conference special. And, we'll branch it league wide ish for a second here because John Scott, former NHLer, former Goon, former All Star, technically All Star MVP, I guess, also that season. He was talking about this recently. I can't recall if it was on a podcast or on radio. I'm just kind of
It's on
seeing it.
his podcast. Yeah.
Okay, so it was on his podcast. I saw it floating around on Twitter, people talking about it, saying how in his mind he believes Connor McDavid is the best player on the planet, best player in the world. I don't think really anybody is going to have any issues with that statement. But the statement he released after that, what came out of his mouth afterward, has caused a stir online because he went from saying, yes, he's the best player in the world to, however, he would not be in my top five when it comes to building a championship team. Not a guy who he would select if he were to try and build a championship team, which to me is just a ludicrous and asinine comment. I mean, you saw what Connor McDavid did last year in the playoffs, going hero mode, dragging that team to the conference final where they had no business being, especially with an injured Leon Draisaitl, and goaltending playing as horrific as it was. It's just ludicrous to me that those words came out of his mouth. He certainly would be, if not the top of my list, certainly top three, let alone top five. But since this is the Eastern Conference edition, Dave, I figured let's take a look at some guys in the Eastern Conference that you would look to if you're building a team to win a championship. So, one season, 1 year, one playoff, what does your top five look like if you were looking to build a team? If there was a draft and you had one of these picks, a top five pick, how is your draft board shaping up in the top five Eastern Conference?
First off, Connor McDavid was 2 points per game in the playoffs, so just want to remind people about that one. If I had the first pick, beat Ilya Sorokin. You need to have that stud in net. And out of all goaltenders right now in the Eastern Conference, I don't know if there's any I think now some will say, well, Linus Ullmark is putting up great numbers. I have more faith in Ilya Sorokin just because he is not playing for as good of a team and he has been putting up elite numbers.
Do you want to turn this into a draft?
We could do top, just maybe do a top five draft.
I mean, we might as well just do a draft. Like we'll do a 5-round draft where we have to build our best team.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
You're taking Sorokin with your first pick.
Sorokin first pick.
That's insane. I mean, yes, he's a terrific goalie and he's been playing him unreal, but why don't you get a guy who's proven in the playoffs? We're talking about the playoffs here, and there's nobody who's more clutch than Andrei Vasilevsky. I mean, for a lot of the same reasons you chose Sorokin for you want a guy in between the pipes, and someone in net is where you can make a difference and steal you a game. There's no one better, and there's no one who's done it more the last 3 years than Andre Vasilevsky. That's the true number one pick there. I can't believe that you went off.
Soroka's numbers in the playoffs are not too shabby either, if you've looked.
Yeah, why don't you go look at game sevens for one Andre Vasilevsky. Guy doesn't even let you get a goal in the back of the net. Has a shutout streak that was intense. Was it like 4 straight shutouts in game sevens? It was insane. Insane. Okay. What's your second overall selection? So you've got your goalie. I've got my goalie.
I'm going to take your defenseman for your goalie, and that is Mr. Victor Hedman.
Okay.
You need that workhorse number one defenseman. I'm taking Victor Hedman.
All right. That makes sense. You can go ahead and take Victor Hedman. I am going to take a guy who, quite honestly, he's a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. He's won gold medals at the Olympics. He has one of the most prolific goals in hockey history, the golden goal. Sidney Crosby, to me, is still one of those guys where when it comes down to it, one game to rule it all, like you're going into a playoff series, that's somebody who still can will his team. Prior to his injury and the injuries to the goaltenders in Pittsburgh, it looked like they were going to win that division against the Rangers last year before Shesterkin decided to turn it up a notch. So I'm going to go with Sidney Crosby as my next pick. Maybe it's a legacy type of selection, but I still think that, for a 2-month span, that guy can still, will you to he can go legend mode. He can go hero mode and will you to a victory in the playoffs. Who do you taking?
I'm going to go with Austin Matthews. I know he has not been at Austin Matthews level this season, but I need that dominant centerman. I need that guy that can score. Austin Matthews I think he's very much capable of doing that.
Yeah, Matthews is a very interesting player because he has not been clutch in the playoffs, like at all. Any of those guys really haven't been very good. That's been the big knock on a lot of those Toronto guys is they kind of don't show up in the playoffs. So, it's an interesting argument to put Matthews. Is he one of the best players in the NHL? Absolutely, absolutely, he is. But at some point, does it not, in the back of your mind, make you think like, he hasn't done it in the playoffs yet, though? You're still willing to roll dice there?
Still rolling the dice on the talent.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, you've left Nikita Kucherov for me to take, so I'm going to go ahead and take Nikita Kucherov as one of my wingers because this guy has 1 billion points in the playoffs these last few seasons, and it doesn't even matter if he misses the whole year or not. He's still out there scoring more goals and has more points than anybody else in the playoffs. So you give me a Nikita Kucherov as a potential player. He might be the best forward next to Connor McDavid in hockey right now. So getting him in, what are we in the 4th round? Yeah,
that was
that's
third
round. Yeah, 3rd round. That's an absolute steal in my book. So thank you so much for Nikita Kucherov. All right, who would be your 4th round selection?
Well, John Scott will like this pick. I'm going to go with Mr. Matthew Tkachuk. Got to get a little bit of that nastiness, a little bit of that pest type mentality. Nobody better than Matthew Tkachuk.
So we're taking 2 different approaches to this draft here. So I'm taking into account pedigree and what I've seen in their careers in the big moments, in the big games. You're doing a lot of projection here. You're hoping that once they get there, they'll be able to do their thing. But that hasn't been the case for Matthew Tkachuk, who was absolutely silent in the playoffs last year. Matthews has been silent the last few seasons. I'll give you Hedman. That guy's been a beast. But the rest of the 3 are very much projections, where I've got Stanley Cup winner in Vasilevsky, Stanley Cup winner in Crosby, Stanley Cup winner in Nikita Kucherov. And do I continue with the theme of Stanley Cup winners? What do I need still? So I got a winger. I need a what do I need? I still need a defenseman. Who do I want as a defenseman in the Eastern Conference where I'm starting? This is so now I'm getting into maybe projection here.
Now you're going into my play field.
But I've already got my top 3 guys. Like I've already got the dudes who have been there and who have won games. And Now I'm trying to think, like, who else could I potentially go after? And I think I'm gonna go the Rasmus Dahlin route. If I was starting and I had to pick a defenseman in the Eastern Conference who wanted to start my team around to go for a big long run and win a playoff, I mean, you look at the way that Rasmus Dahlin plays. He plays the right way. He plays a little physical. He's a two-way guy who can play offensively. This season, he's third in the league in terms of defensive scoring with 37 points. He's up there with Erik Karlsson. He's got 10 goals on the year, just 3 back of Karlsson for the lead. So he can really do a lot of different things, provide you offense, defense, and he's still very, very young, and he's a big boy. And when he was drafted into the NHL, a lot of the comparables that he was getting was, this guy could be Victor Hedman in a few years. And it seems like this year he's kind of unlocked that potential, and he's growing towards that. So thank you very much for giving me baby Hedman here in the fourth round and starting off my defenseman with a player like that. You now are into your 5th round selection. You need a winger and a defenseman. That's what remains on your team that you need to draft. So winger or defenseman.
You see, you brought up Rasmus Dahlin, fantastic pick. I know you went with my kind of trajectory here, but you also forgot about another particular defenseman.
I didn't forget. I just chose to go with Rasmus Dahlin ahead of Adam Fox. I didn't forget. That was my decision.
So then I will go get the Vezina Trophy winning Adam Fox to round out a.
He
Adam
won a Vezina. He won a Vezina, did he?
Sorry, Norris. I'm thinking of Vezina for some reason. But you have Norris and Hedman on your blue line.
Pretty good.
Beta complete.
And by Norris, you mean Adam Fox.
Yeah, Norris. You have 2 Norris guys.
Or were you taking Josh Norris? Are you taking Josh Norris? Is that what you want? Do you want Josh Norris?
No, I want Josh Norris.
No? Okay.
No, sorry, Ross. No Josh Norris on this team.
See, Ross would have took Josh Norris for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. All Norris trophy caliber blue line.
So I now need, what do I need? I need a winger and a defenseman as well. Oh gosh, there's a couple of different ways that I could go here, but ultimately I think, oh man, you know what? I'm gonna do it. Because he started to show signs of it a year ago. I'm gonna go with Mitch Marner. Mitchell Marner. I think is a guy.
For picking a guy who doesn't perform in the playoffs, and you go out and you get the guy who has been criticized for not being a playoff performer.
But he finally showed up last year in the playoffs. Okay, so I'm deciding between 2 different players here. I don't want you to take the other guy, but I'm deciding between 2 players. Okay, is this in? Am I taking Mitch Marner? Are you making me stick to that, or can I still kind of think?
I mean, if you want to, it's up to you if you want to lock that on in.
Here's my rationale. Okay, so you and I, we've been able to watch Mitch Marner on a nightly basis. We cover the guy, we cover the team. We know what he can do on both sides of the ice, and that's what I'm thinking of in the playoffs. I think Mitch Marner, the way that he's unlocked himself offensively, this year, and the way he did it last season. I think if he can continue to do that into the playoffs, there's no other guy out here that's on the board that I think can be as impactful defensively. A guy who can kill penalties, a guy who plays kind of the right way. The question is, he hasn't been able to do that in the playoffs quite yet. But has he gotten to a point where last year I think we did start to see that? He went on that massive, it was like 18 straight playoff games without a goal. And then he broke that streak last year. And he ended up playing pretty solid hockey in that series against Tampa Bay last year. So I'm kind of rolling the dice and hoping that Mitch Marner could be that guy. Or I could go with David Pastrnak, who's a player who we know can also do a whole lot of goal scoring and can also play pretty solid in the playoffs. There's a track record of that happening. So, I'll let you decide. Would you rather me take Mitch Marner, or would you rather me take David Pastrnak?
I was gonna say I'm gonna take the leftover whoever you don't pick.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? I'm gonna go with Pastrnak. I'm gonna go with Pasta, just because I'm gonna stick to what has been my kind of what I've been talking about when I'm building my team, proving guys who've been there before, a dude who's played a lot of Stanley Cup playoff hockey, Cup final hockey. I'm gonna go with Pasta over Mitch Marner, which means I guess you can have Marner if you'd like.
Well, I'm going to take Marner because now I got Mitch Marner reuniting with Matthew Tkachuk, where they
Nice.
have won before. It was Memorial Cup, but it still counts. And you get now a line of Matthews, Marner, and Tkachuk. Oh, that's a dream right there.
It's pretty
And
good. That's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. I'll give you that. It's definitely solid to have. So my final selection, I guess now I need because you have your final guys. One,
Got
two.
my roster. Well, got my starting lineup.
Yeah, so you've got your starting lineup. I need one
Defense.
more player. I need a defenseman. Okay, so who's left out there? So I'm deciding between maybe who do you got? Dougie Hamilton, Sergachev. Hampus Lindholm has been fantastic. Noah Dobson. Ooh, I got it. I'm going to stick with the theme of guys who've been there before. Charlie McAvoy. Going with Charlie McAvoy as my other defenseman. You give me Rasmus Dahlin and Charlie McAvoy as my blue line. Oh my God, that's going to be so hard to do anything. Then I've got Crosby with Kucherov and Pasternak up front. Vasilevsky as my goaltender. There's no chance that you're going to even come close to what I got cooking over here on this team. I think I win this by a landslide. By an absolute landslide.
Landslide. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay there.
Yeah. We're gonna have to put this out on a poll. We're gonna have to put a poll out there to see who wins. Let us know in the comments down below if you're on YouTube. Who wins this draft, Dave or myself? I've got Vasilevsky in goal with Dahlin and McAvoy on defense with Crosby, Kucherov, and Pasternak as my forwards. He's got Sorokin with Hedman and Fox, and then he's got Matthews, Tkachuk, and Mitch Marner. All right, fun stuff, Dave. That'll do it for us here on the pod. Appreciate you filling in for Ross. That'll do it on the Locked On NHL podcast. Tomorrow they will return with another show, so make sure that you guys return. You can follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Brand new podcast of the Locked On NHL show coming at you tomorrow. But for now, that does it for Dave and I. Keep it locked right here on Locked On NHL.